The citation fluttered in Marcus Thompson's weathered hand like a dying butterfly, the bold red letters screaming across the official HOA letterhead. Violation notice. $500. Fine, unauthorized livestock on residential property. His stallion, Midnight, a magnificent black Tennessee Walker with a coat that shimmered like oil in moonlight, stood perfectly still beside him, breath steaming in the cold morning air. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to mirror the confusion in Marcus's own expression. The HOA patrol officer, a thin man in his 50s named Gerald Hutchins, stood 20 feet away beside his white golf cart, arms crossed with the satisfaction of someone who'd just caught a criminal red-handed. His fluorescent yellow safety vest caught the early sunlight, making him look like a crossing guard who'd wandered into the wrong job. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remove that animal from the premises immediately," Gerald called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that small power creates in small men. "This is a residential community. Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states no livestock, farm animals, or equestrian creatures permitted on private property." Marcus read the citation again, each word more absurd than the last. He was standing in his own driveway, the same driveway he'd paved 3 years ago with his own money, the same property where he paid his monthly HOA dues like clockwork, never late, never questioned. The citation listed his address, 847 Meadowbrook Lane. It described the violation. One black horse, approximately 16 hands high, illegally housed on residential property. It demanded immediate compliance and payment within 10 business days. "Officer," Marcus began, his voice calm despite the heat building in his chest, "I think there's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake," Gerald interrupted, pulling out his tablet T. "Oh, show photographic evidence. I've got 3 photos right here, time-stamped this morning at 6:47 a.m. That's your property, that's your horse, that's a violation." Indeed, the photos showed Midnight standing in Marcus's side yard near the custom-built shelter Marcus had constructed for his morning visits. The shelter was temporary, just a simple 3-sided structure where Midnight could rest during their training sessions before Marcus walked him back. Back where? That question hung in the air, unasked, because Gerald hadn't bothered to ask questions. He'd seen what he considered a violation and executed his duties with the enthusiasm of someone who finally had something interesting to report at the monthly HOA board meeting. "I need to explain something," Marcus tried again, reaching into his pocket for his phone. "If you'd just let me." "Sir, I've explained the policy. Now, I'm asking nicely, remove the animal, or I'll have to escalate this to the board, and trust me, they won't be as understanding as I'm being." Gerald's hand moved to the radio clipped to his belt, a gesture meant to intimidate, to remind Marcus who held the power here. Midnight shifted his weight, hooves clicking against the concrete with the precise rhythm of a grandfather clock. The stallion had been through this before, not citations, but the subtle dance of human conflict. Horses sense tension better than humans see it, and Midnight was sensing plenty. A woman jogging past slowed her pace, earbuds dangling, curiosity replacing her workout focus. Then a man walking his golden retriever stopped completely, phone already in hand, though whether to call someone or record something wasn't yet clear. Marcus felt the weight of their attention. He'd felt it before, countless times, in countless situations, that particular awareness that comes when a black man stands in public disagreement with a white authority figure. The mathematics of American social dynamics, where 2 plus 2 sometimes equals whatever the person with the clipboard says it equals. "I'm not removing anything," Marcus said quietly, because I haven't violated any rules. What I need is for someone at the board to actually listen before throwing around fines." Gerald's expression hardened. "That's your choice, sir, but the fine stands, and if that animal isn't gone by this evening, it'll be $500 per day yield until compliance." He ripped off the pink copy of the citation and held it out. Marcus didn't take it, let it fall to the ground if Gerald wanted to play games. "I'll be contacting the board myself," Marcus said, his hand moving to Midnight's neck, fingers finding the familiar warmth of the horse's powerful muscles. The touch grounded him, reminded him of who he was and what he'd built. "That's your right," Gerald replied, already turning back toward his golf cart. "Have a blessed day." The electric whine of the cart's motor faded down the street, leaving Marcus standing in his driveway with a $500 fine for bringing his own horse onto his own property. The absurdity would have been comical if it wasn't so perfectly designed to humiliate. But Gerald Hutchins didn't know something crucial. He didn't know that Marcus Thompson's morning routine with Midnight wasn't just casual recreation. He didn't know about the trail that connected Marcus's backyard to the private path that wound through the conservation easement behind Meadowbrook Estates. He didn't know where that path led. And he certainly didn't know what Marcus owned on the other side of those woods. The Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had been sliding toward dysfunction for years, but the real problems started when Donald Pritchard became board president 18 months ago. Pritchard was a retired insurance executive who'd moved to the neighborhood from Connecticut, bringing with him a briefcase full of bylaws, regulations, and an Excel spreadsheet that tracked every property in the development like a military general surveying enemy territory. He believed in rules the way some people believe in religion, absolutely, without question, and with missionary zeal for converting others. Under his leadership, the HOA had transformed from a sleepy organization that occasionally collected dues and organized a summer barbecue into something resembling a municipal government designed by people who'd never held actual power before and were making up for lost time. Fines for mailboxes painted the wrong shade of beige. Citations for holiday decorations left up 3 days past the arbitrary deadline. Violations for grass height exceeding 3 inches, measured, absurdly, with actual rulers during compliance patrols. Marcus had watched it all unfold with growing concern, but he'd mostly stayed out of HOA politics. He attended his meetings, paid his dues, and focused on his business. The business that was thriving quietly beyond those woods. The business that employed 43 people. The business that had become one of the most respected equestria and facilities in the entire state. Thompson Ridge Stables. Marcus had built it from nothing, starting 15 years ago when he was 32 years old with a dream that everyone told him was impossible. A black man from the south side of Chicago building a luxury horse boarding and training facility? The banks laughed, the investors passed. Even some of his own family questioned whether he understood what he was attempting. But Marcus had grown up around horses, had worked at a stable during high school, had learned everything from mucking stalls to advanced dressage training. He understood horses in that wordless way that separates true horsemen from people who just ride. And he understood business better than the bankers who'd rejected his loan applications. He'd saved every dollar, worked 3 jobs, and finally scraped together enough for 20 acres of land adjacent to where Meadowbrook Estates would eventually be developed. Back then it was just empty land, trees, and possibility. Now, Thompson Ridge Stables housed 72 horses, hosted international riding competitions, ran summer camps for kids, and offered therapeutic riding programs for veterans and children with disabilities. The facility included an indoor arena, outdoor competition rings, climate-controlled stables, a tack shop, and a farmhouse-style office where Marcus managed operations with his wife Denise, who handled the business side with the precision of a Swiss watch. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that Meadowbrook Estates had been built 5 years after he'd established his stables, marketed as a luxury community adjacent to pristine conservation land and world-class equestrian facilities. The developers had literally used Thompson Ridge Stables as a selling point, featuring it in brochures with photos of horses running through pastoral fields. Many of his neighbors knew what he did for a living. He'd had conversations at neighborhood barbecues, had invited several families to visit the stables, had even offered free riding lessons to neighborhood kids. But the HOA board, in their insulated bubble of committee meetings and violation reports, apparently had no idea. Or perhaps they knew and didn't care. Marcus suspected the latter, especially after the incident 3 months ago when Pritchard had questioned why Marcus's pickup truck, a perfectly maintained Ford F-350 necessary for hauling horse trailers, didn't fit the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. The suggestion that Marcus should park his work vehicle somewhere more appropriate had been delivered with a smile, but the message was clear. Now, standing in his driveway with a seater, Tyan for bringing his own horse onto his own property during his morning training routine, Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced in countless random traffic stops, in department stores where security followed him through aisles, in meetings where his expertise was questioned by people with half his knowledge. Midnight nudged his shoulder, and Marcus smiled, despite everything. The horse was asking a question. Are we training or standing around? Let's go home, boy, Marcus murmured, leading Midnight toward the backyard, toward the trail, toward the property where they actually belonged. The path through the woods was beautiful this time of year, early fall, painting the leaves in amber and crimson. Marcus had walked it 1,000 times, knew every root and rock, could probably navigate it blind. The conservation easement that separated his house from his business was a half-mile of protected forest that would never be developed, a natural buffer that Marcus appreciated more than the developers who'd insisted on it. As they emerged from the tree line onto Thompson Ridge property, Marcus felt the tension drain from his shoulders. Here, he wasn't a suspect or a violator. He was home. The main barn came into view first, a massive structure of dark wood and stone that had been featured in Equestrian magazine 2 years ago. Staff members were already working, mucking stalls, feeding horses, preparing for the day's lessons and training sessions. A group of riders were warming up in the outdoor arena, their horses moving through exercises with the fluid grace that comes from excellent training. Denise was standing near the office, phone pressed to her ear, probably dealing with the morning's scheduling. When she saw Marcus and Midnight, she ended the call and walked over, her expression shifting from business mode to concerned wife in an instant. "How was the session?" she asked, though she could clearly read his face. Marcus handed her the citation without a word. She read it once, then again, then looked up at him with an expression that mixed disbelief, anger, and something close to exhaustion. "They fined you for training Midnight at our house?" Gerald Hutchins, HOA Patrol, apparently didn't feel the need to ask questions before writing it up. "But, Marcus, everyone knows you own Thompson Ridge. Half the HOA board has been here for events." "Not everyone, apparently." Denise stared at the citation like it might transform into something sensible if she looked long enough. "This is insane. We'll just call the board, explain the situation." "We could do that," Marcus interrupted softly, "or we could let them figure it out themselves." His wife knew that tone. She'd been married to Marcus for 14 years, long enough to recognize when he'd shifted from frustration to something more calculated. "What are you thinking?" Marcus led Midnight toward his stall, the stallion's hooves echoing in the barn's high-ceilinged interior. I'm thinking that maybe it's time the HOA board learned exactly who they're dealing with. I'm thinking that maybe I'm tired of explaining myself to people who should have done their homework. And I'm thinking that this citation might be the best thing that's happened to me in months. Marcus: I'll pay the fine, Denise. I'll follow their rules, but I'm going to make sure they understand exactly what they did. But what Marcus didn't know was that Gerald Hutchins had already reported his citation to the board with a special note. Resident showed hostility and refused compliance. And Donald Pritchard had already decided that Marcus Thompson represented exactly the kind of rule-breaker who needed to be made an example of. The collision course was set. The emergency HOA board meeting was called for Thursday evening, 6 days after the citation was issued. Marcus received the notification via email, terse, formal, demanding his presence to discuss ongoing violations and contempt for community standards. The meeting would be held at the community clubhouse, and Marcus's attendance was mandatory to avoid further punitive action. Denise wanted to come with him, but Marcus insisted on going alone. This was his fight, and he wanted the board to see him clearly, without distraction or defense. The clubhouse parking lot was surprisingly full when Marcus arrived at 7:00 p.m. Apparently, word had spread about the meeting, and neighbors who usually skipped these events had shown up for the drama. Marcus recognized faces from block parties and weekend walks, some nodding in acknowledgement, others deliberately looking away. Inside, the meeting room was arranged like a courtroom. The 5-member board seated at a long table on a raised platform, rows of folding chairs for residents facing them like pews facing a pulpit. Donald Pritchard sat in the center, reading glasses perched on his nose, a thick binder of documents spread before him like sacred texts. Gerald Hutchins sat off to the side, smug in his role as witness and enforcer. Marcus took a seat in the front row, alone, calm, watching. Pritchard called the meeting to order with a gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. For a homeowners association, then launched into preliminary business, budget reports, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, the bureaucratic theatre designed to establish authority before the main event. Finally, 45 minutes in, Pritchard cleared his throat and said the words Marcus had been waiting for. Now, we come to a serious matter, violation case 20-25-847 ML. Mr. Marcus Thompson and the unauthorized housing of livestock on residential property. The room fell silent, that particular hush that comes when conflict is about to be made public. Mr. Thompson, Pritchard continued, peering over his reading glasses, you were cited on October the 1st for housing a horse on your property in direct violation of Section 7.3 of our community bylaws. According to our patrol officer's report, you refused to remove the animal and showed hostility toward authority. The fine of $500 remains unpaid. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Marcus stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. I do. Please proceed. First, I want to clarify something. I wasn't housing a horse on my property. I was training my horse during our morning routine before walking him back to his actual home. It's something I've done 3 times a week for the past 2 years, without incident. The bylaws don't distinguish between temporary and permanent housing, Pritchard interrupted. A horse on residential property is a violation regardless of duration. I understand that, Marcus replied calmly, but I'm wondering if anyone on this board bothered to ask where the horse lives, or why I was training him at my house, or what I do for a living. Board member Patricia Hughes, a retired teacher who'd always been friendly to Marcus, shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, we all know you work with horses. Do we? Marcus turned to face the room, addressing everyone now. Because I'm starting to wonder if this board actually knows anything about the people they're supposed to serve. Let me clarify something for everyone here. He pulled out his phone, pulled up a series of photos and walked them up to the board table. Pritchard reluctantly accepted the phone, his expression already beginning to change as he scrolled through the images. Photos of Thompson Ridge Stables, the sign at the entrance with Marcus Thompson, owner-operator, clearly visible, the main barn with its distinctive architecture, the competition arena hosting a regional championship, the therapeutic riding program with smiling children and veterans. Thompson Ridge Stables, Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. 72 horses, 43 employees, annual revenue last year of $3.2 million, featured in Equestrian Magazine, Southern Living, and Business Journal as one of the region's premier equestrian facilities. Located exactly half a mile from this clubhouse, connected to my backyard by the conservation trail. The room exploded in whispers. Pritchard's face had gone pale, then red, cycling through shades like a mood ring. "Mr. Thompson, we weren't aware that I own the stables that your own development was marketed next to, that your property values are higher specifically because Thompson Ridge exists, that the pristine conservation land and world-class equestrian facilities in the brochure refers to my business?" Patricia Hughes covered her mouth, clearly mortified. Another board member, James Chen, was frantically typing on his phone, probably pulling up the development's original marketing materials. But Marcus wasn't finished. "The horse that Officer Hutchins cited me for, that's Midnight, my personal stallion that I've been training in dressage for international competition. The unauthorized livestock is an animal worth $200,000. The illegal housing structure is a temporary shelter I built with proper permits from the county, permits I didn't need HOA approval for because they're on the portion of my property that backs onto the conservation easement, which is technically outside HOA jurisdiction." Gerald Hutchins had shrunk into his chair, his fluorescent vest suddenly looking like a costume instead of a uniform. "Now," Marcus continued, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made people lean forward, "I could have explained all of this on October the 1st. I tried to, but Officer Hutchins wasn't interested in explanations. He was interested in catching a violation, and this board wasn't interested in facts. They were interested in making an example." "Mr. Thompson," Pritchard tried to regain control, If you'd known what, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Pritchard. I shouldn't need to be a business owner for my word to matter. I shouldn't need to prove my worth before you'll listen. But since we're here, let's talk about worth." Marcus pulled out another document, his property tax statement. "I pay $14,000 annually in property taxes. My business pays another $87,000 on the stable property. I employ 43 people from this county. I've donated over $100,000 to local charities through our therapeutic riding program, and I've never, not once, violated a single legitimate HOA rule." The silence in the room was absolute. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, and now his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd built something real. "I'm not paying that fine because it's invalid, but more than that, I'm requesting a full audit of HOA enforcement over the past 18 months. I want to see every citation issued, every fine collected, and every compliance patrol report, because I have a feeling that if we look closely, we're going to find some interesting patterns." Pritchard's eyes widened. "Mr. Thompson, It's completely within my rights as a homeowner. Section 12.4 of the bylaws. Any resident can request documentation review. I'm requesting it now, formally, and I'd like the results presented at next month's meeting." Board member Chen nodded slowly. That's actually correct. The bylaws do allow for that." "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I'm filing a formal complaint against Officer Hutchins for harassment and failure to conduct due diligence before issuing citations. and I'm recommending that this board undergo mandatory training on proper investigation procedures before enforcement actions. The room was watching a power reversal happen in real time, and several neighbours were now openly smiling. But the real twist came when Patricia Hughes stood up, her expression a mixture of shame and determination. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. We all do. This should never have happened, and I think you're right about the audit." She turned to Pritchard. "Donald, I'm moving to void the citation against Mr. Thompson and to launch the full review he's requested. Second?" "Second," James Chen said immediately. Pritchard looked like a man watching his kingdom crumble. "This is highly irregular." "All in favour?" Patricia called. 3 hands went up instantly. Only Pritchard and 1 other board member abstained. "Motion carries," Patricia announced. "Marcus, the fine is void, and we'll have those documents ready for review." The audit results arrived 3 weeks later, delivered in a thick manila envelope that Denise brought to Marcus while he was working with a young mare in the training arena. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he finished the session, walked the mare cool, handed her off to staff, and only then sat down on a hay bale in the barn's afternoon light to read what the HOA had been doing. The patterns were even worse than he'd suspected. Over 18 months, the HOA had issued 247 citations. Of those, 183 had been issued to just 12 households, less than 8% of the community, and those 12 households shared something obvious once you saw it laid out in data. They were the only non-white homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates. Marcus's household had received 31 citations, more than anyone, everything from grass height violations to unapproved holiday decorations to vehicle aesthetic concerns to this ridiculous horse citation. Meanwhile, white homeowners with identical or worse violations had received nothing. A black family 3 streets over had been cited 17 times for excessive outdoor activity because their kids played basketball in their driveway. A Hispanic couple had been fined repeatedly for unapproved landscaping when they'd planted a vegetable garden. An Asian family had been harassed about cooking odors and cultural decorations. The documentation included photos, and the bias was stunning. A black homeowner cited for a mailbox painted off-white when the approved color was beige, with photographic evidence showing they were identical shades. Meanwhile, dozens of white homeowners had mailboxes in every color imaginable. No citations. It was systematic, it was deliberate, and it was documented in the HOA's own records. Denise read over his shoulder, her hand tightening on Marcus's arm. "This is discrimination. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." "It's worse than that," Marcus said quietly. "It's a community that's been quietly driving out anyone who doesn't look like Donald Pritchard." He thought about the families who'd moved away, the neighbours he'd watched pack up and leave after months of constant harassment. At the time, he'd assumed they'd found better opportunities. Now he wondered how many had been driven out by this death-by-1,000 citations strategy. The emergency board meeting 2 weeks later was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing in hallways and doorways trying to hear what was about to unfold. The local newspaper had gotten wind of the story, and a reporter sat in the back row, notebook ready. Marcus arrived with Denise, but also with something else, a lawyer named Rachel Martinez, who specialized in housing discrimination cases and who'd reviewed the audit results with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a tumor. Patricia Hughes had called the meeting herself, having taken temporary control of the board after Pritchard's hasty resignation. Gerald Hutchins had also retired from his patrol duties, deciding that Florida sounded nice this time of year. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began, her voice shaking slightly. "We've called this meeting to address serious concerns about HOA enforcement practices and to formally apologize to several families who have been subjected to discriminatory treatment." She went through the audit results, and as the numbers were read aloud, the room's atmosphere shifted from curiosity to horror. White homeowners who'd been oblivious to what was happening were now seeing it clearly, and their reactions ranged from shock to shame to anger. The board has voted unanimously to void all citations issued over the past 18 months and to refund all fines collected, Patricia continued. We're also implementing new oversight procedures, bias training for any enforcement personnel, and a community review board to prevent this from ever happening again. It was a start, but Marcus knew it wasn't enough. When Patricia opened the floor to comments, Marcus stood. The room fell silent. "I appreciate the board's acknowledgement," he began, "but apologies and reforms don't undo 18 months of harassment. They don't restore the dignity of families who were treated like criminals in their own neighborhood, and they don't help the families who've already left because they couldn't take it anymore." He paused, letting that sink in. "I've been fortunate. I have resources. I have a business that gives me credibility in ways that shouldn't matter but do. But what about the families who don't have those things? The single mother who works 2 jobs and doesn't have time to fight citations? The elderly couple who just wanted to live in peace?" Rachel Martinez stood beside him, which is why Mr. Thompson and several other affected families will be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, not because we're vindictive, but because patterns like this need to be investigated at a level beyond local politics. The newspaper reporter was writing furiously. "However," Marcus continued, "there's a better path forward. Instead of just tearing down what was broken, let's build something better. I'm proposing that we transform this HOA into something that actually serves the community, all of it. That means diverse board representation, transparent enforcement policies, and active programs that bring people together instead of driving them apart." He outlined a vision. Community events at Tompe, Sunridge Stables, free riding programs for neighborhood kids, mentorship initiatives, cultural celebrations that honored the diversity the previous board had tried to erase. "I'm not interested in revenge," Marcus said finally. "I'm interested in making sure that no family ever again has to choose between their dignity and their home. And I'm willing to work with anyone here who shares that goal." The room erupted in applause. Not everyone. A few older residents sat with crossed arms, clearly uncomfortable with this new direction, but the majority of the community, including many who'd been silent witnesses to the discrimination, rose to their feet. Patricia Hughes was wiping tears from her eyes. "Marcus, I think I speak for everyone when I say we'd be honored to have you on the board. Would you consider—" "No," Marcus interrupted gently. "I've got a business to run. But I'll serve on the Community Advisory Committee, and I'll be watching closely." As the meeting dissolved into conversations and planning sessions, Marcus felt Denise squeeze his hand. Outside the clubhouse windows, the sun was setting over the conservation land that connected their house to Thompson Ridge, painting the autumn leaves in shades of gold. Somewhere in those stables, Midnight was probably eating his dinner, completely unaware that he'd sparked a revolution with nothing more than his presence in the wrong driveway at the wrong time. Or maybe the right time after all. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the outdoor arena at Thompson Ridge Stables, watching a group of kids from Meadowbrook Estates taking their first riding lesson. The program had been his idea. Free lessons for neighborhood children taught by his most experienced staff, open to any family regardless of income. 37 kids had signed up in the first week. Their laughter and excited chatter filled the stable yard, mixing with the soft sounds of horses and the crisp December air. One of the young riders was Gerald Hutchins' grandson, brought by his mother, who'd approached Marcus with tears and apologies. Marcus had welcomed them both, because this was never about punishment. It was about transformation. The HOA board now included 4 new members, including James Chen as president. The Community Review Committee had representatives from every demographic in the neighborhood. The revised bylaws explicitly prohibited discriminatory enforcement and required documentation of investigation procedures before any citation could be issued. And the fines, every penny that had been unjustly collected was refunded, with interest and a formal letter of apology sent to every affected family. But the real change was harder to quantify. It showed up in block parties where multiple languages mixed with English, in neighbors helping neighbors without suspicion or judgment, in kids who'd previously been cited for excessive outdoor activity, now playing freely while their parents watched without anxiety. Denise found Marcus watching the lesson, wrapped an arm around his waist. "You thinking about that citation?" Marcus smiled, thinking about how sometimes the worst things lead to the best changes. If Gerald hadn't written that ticket, none of this happens. The discrimination continues, families keep leaving, the community keeps dividing. "So you're grateful?" Denise asked, skeptical. "No," Marcus laughed. "I'm not that evolved, but I'm satisfied, and that's close enough." In the arena, a small girl with braids managed to post correctly for the first time, bouncing in sync with her horse's trot. Her mother, standing at the fence, looked at Marcus with an expression of gratitude that needed no words. This was the real justice, not in apologies or reformed bylaws, but in children who'd grow up knowing they belonged everywhere, in a community that had faced its ugliness and chosen something better. In proving that dignity isn't something you earn or prove, but something you insist upon. Midnight appeared from the barn, led by one of the trainers for his afternoon turnout. The stallion paused, saw Marcus, and nickered in greeting, a sound somewhere between a horse's laugh and a question. Marcus walked over, ran his hand down the powerful neck, felt the warmth and strength beneath the glossy coat. "Yeah, boy," he murmured, "we're home, and this time everyone knows exactly where that is." The citation had been voided, the fine erased, the discrimination exposed and dismantled, but more than that, a community had been forced to look at itself and decide what kind of place it wanted to be. Most chose correctly. And for those who didn't, for those who quietly sold their houses and moved away rather than live next to neighbors who didn't look like them, Marcus felt nothing but relief. Let them take their prejudice somewhere else. Meadowbrook Estates was better without them. As the sun set behind Thompson Ridge stables, casting long shadows across the pastures where horses grazed in peas, seafull contentment, Marcus understood something fundamental. Justice isn't always immediate, and it's rarely simple. But when it comes, when a community decides to be better than its worst impulses, it transforms everything it touches. The HOA patrol had fined his horse, not knowing he owned the stables. But in their ignorance, they'd revealed their own bankruptcy, moral, ethical, and human. And in that revelation, they'd given Marcus Thompson exactly what he needed to change not just his neighborhood, but the lives of every family who'd been made to feel like strangers in their own homes. Sometimes the smallest injustice illuminates the largest truth. And sometimes a man, a horse, and a $500 citation become the spark that burns away everything false, leaving only what's real. Marcus Thompson had built his stables from nothing, brick by brick, dream by dream. Now he'd helped build something even more important, a community where everyone's horse could stand in the driveway without questions. Because belonging isn't something you permit. It's something you protect. For everyone,